Welcome to Biblical Archaeology in 5. Today we're going to talk about this idea in the ancient world, and I'll focus on Egypt, where they believed that their gods inhabited the statues that they made. They believed that their gods inhabited the very banners that they hung and marched with their armies and more. And what they really believed was that they would build these temples and that their gods, via the statue, the banners, etc., would live in that temple. And that's why they brought sacrifices of food to feed the gods. Well, they had really interesting ceremonies that they did. And one particularly interesting one was that every year they would act out, if you will, the creation mythology of the Egyptians. And they would march their god, the statue, from the Nile to the west to where the temple was. And it was full of pomp and circumstance, and everybody came to it, and they believed that they received a blessing as the god passed by. Now, let's flash forward, and what I want you to think about from an archaeological standpoint is that the ancients really believed that their gods inhabited these statues, lived in these temples, etc. So go to the first century and be with St. Paul when he's in the city of Athens and Corinth, and he's overwhelmed by the gods and the temples. There's a temple on every corner. And what he found was that, of course, the people were overly religious, but they were worshiping the wrong gods. And so when you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and the greater context there is unity of the body. And St. Paul, he's brilliant, and he knows that he's writing to first century Greek-speaking folk living in Corinth, a city with a temple on every corner, right? And what is he doing? He's shaping an argument, a polemic, just like Moses did back in the day, say in Exodus and Genesis, etc., where there is an argument against the gods of Egypt. And so, St. Paul, in the context of his discussion of unity, what does he do? He throws in a building metaphor. He says, you are a building. And then he says more, you are a temple. Don't you know that you are a temple of the Holy Spirit? Now just stop right there. He's playing off of their first century beliefs that their gods lived in those temples, in the statues themselves. And so what he's doing is he is turning it on its ear. And he is basically causing these Greek folk to think in terms of, oh, who's the greater God? Is it the God who has to have people make a temple for him? Or is it Yahweh, who has a temple not made with hands, the believers? And God is building you believers up, Paul is saying, into a building and a temple. And guess what? The Holy Spirit's living inside of you. And so, in a very amazing, and let's say totally real sense, God has turned the wisdom of these pagans on its ear and has created a temple that he makes, which is us, and he puts his Spirit inside of us, and so we are truly image bearers, bearing the image of God into a lost and dying world.